Baker Show. Seeking answers to age-old questions, deciphering the world painted around you by the mainstream media. This is the Kev Baker Show. And now, here is your host, Kev Baker.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome back to another live broadcast of the Kev Baker Show right here on its home network of TFRlive.com. I am your host for the next 2 hours of what's going to be absolutely mind-blowing radio right here. My name's Kev Baker, and tonight, it's Wednesday night, I'm joined by my other co-host, Mr. I almost said Johnny Whistles there. Anthony Patch, you're with us. You almost became Whistles for the night, Tony.
Well, that's probably an improvement given my Nephilim hands that keep interrupting your train of thought.
It's because you've both got that similar hairstyle. It really is. And, you know, tonight's show, Tony, all joking aside, this is going to be a really amazing couple hours of radio because tonight's guest is a returning guest, and it's thanks to you that we've put this show together tonight, because with everything that's happened to me over the past year, obviously, I've lost contact with people. Things have been moving too fast, and I'm really, really grateful to you for putting together tonight's show.
Well, no, it's my pleasure, and Gary Wayne's a good friend. He and I have had an opportunity to speak before on a different platform, but Gary is a hardcore researcher. He has a 700-plus book of pure research, biblically based, that we're going to talk about tonight. I'm going to let Gary step in here in about 5 seconds and give his curriculum vitae and the title of his book. And
even
go ahead.
Gary does that, I just want to give the audience a taste of this man's writing, because just the opening paragraph of his book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, if this doesn't get you excited about tonight's show, I don't know what will, because it says here, what would you do if you discovered the end times and the Antichrist were somehow interconnected with giants, modern conspiracy theories, aliens, vampires, secret societies, and fairies? What would you do if you learned refugees from another apocalypse dutifully encoded dire warnings into worldwide testimonies, preserving them for a specific generation? This generation concerning an ancient and ongoing conspiracy to enslave mankind. Would you simply walk away? Seriously, would you really tell anyone? Or would you disregard the personal onslaughts that would be sure to follow the exposure of such controversial discoveries? Now that there, folks, that should get you ready for tonight's show with author Gary Wayne. And as Tony was gratefully sharing there, Gary is a Christian contrarian who has maintained a lifelong love affair with biblical prophecy, history, and mythology, and his extensive study has encompassed the Holy Bible and Gnostic scriptures, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, the Gilgamesh, and other ancient epics, language, etymology, and secret publications. And that's why, Gary, I'm so excited to finally have you back tonight, sir. How are you doing?
I am doing just excellent, and just so happy to be back working with you, Kev, and working with Anthony again, and very much looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have this evening.
Now, where can people find your website and this absolutely amazing book? And I'm not just saying that, folks. I've got this book sat in front of me. It's a massive book. I haven't read it from cover to cover. I've dived in from time to time because there's so many fascinating topics in there, Gary. So where can people get a hold of this?
Yeah, so you can pick it up on Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com. It's available on most online bookstores. It's also available through a local bookstore if you wanted to support them. It's distributed by Bookmasters if they don't have it on the shelf, so they can order it through Bookmasters, who distributes the book. You can also get signed copies on my website at the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis 6 with the number 6. And on the website, you can actually have a look at all 98 chapters and get a feel for what the book is about, because I provide a generous excerpt on each chapter.
Absolutely.
You can get a hold of me through my website, off the email there, or you can get a hold of me through Facebook under Gary Wayne or any of the Genesis 6 conspiracy pages that I have out there. And I also work with the Giantology page as well. And you can follow me or get a hold of me on Twitter at GaryWayne63, at GaryWayne63. And if you do get a hold of me with a question, I will get back to you.
Absolutely brilliant. Now, we were trying to decide where to start tonight. And of course, September the 23rd, a date that has been cast into all of our minds forever. It's in our rear view mirror now. But what really happened on September the 23rd? And this is where we're going to kick off tonight's discussion, because, Gary, so many people were losing their mind in the lead up to this 23rd of September prophecy event. What was your take on all of that, man?
Yeah, I was quite concerned at how it had turned into such a event, and I think maybe for maybe some of the wrong reasons. It's one of those things that I was thinking that, and I want to qualify for the people that, prophecy doesn't always tend to happen the way people think it's going to happen. And, certainly look at what happened to the people of Judea when the Messiah came. And they certainly didn't come in the form and the way that they would have expected it. So that's one of the things we have to learn about prophetic things. And what September 23rd was referring to was some astronomical alignment, but that would refer to Revelation 12 with the picture of the woman and the child and the dragon. But unfortunately, we have to be careful of the signs, and we also have to be careful of the order of how prophecy probably will come out. And again, I know there will be a lot of disagreements on that, but Revelation 12 happens during the time of the trumpets, and it's well into the Revelation sort of narrative if you were to read it as a sequence of events. Now, not everybody reads it that way, but so that was one of the first things that I was watching very closely at. And then, but really I was watching closely for is a sign that's interpreted through astrology is probably not the way to interpret it for a Christian. I know there's going to be signs and things in the end time, just as there's going to be, many false Christs and many false prophets who will also perform great signs and miracles to deceive the elect if that were possible. And I think that was a good warning. To watch it is one thing, but to predict certain events to happen at that day is kind of getting way ahead of ourselves. And I'm not so sure it lines up with the balance of prophecy that September 23rd was going to all of a sudden project us right into the end days. And I also want to make very, very clear, though, in case people aren't really understanding where I'm coming from, is I do believe the end days are on the horizon. I'm just not convinced that the timing of September 23rd with this particular sign was relevant to where we are in the lead into the end time. So that's just my take on it. But I would also suggest that this may be the first of many of these types of things that we're going to be dealing with, because there's going to be a lot of signs.
Absolutely. Tony, let's bring you in here, because I know September the 23rd, this was a date that we spoke about quite often in the build-up to it, wasn't it?
Yeah, and in fact, Friday the 22nd, we had a show in which we talked about the 23rd. We also talked about Cassini, the space probe that entered into Saturn's atmosphere. So we had a couple of things to talk about that were out there in the sort of the land of woo, as we like to say here on TFR. Something you taught me, Kev, the land of woo. I presented it as not the day of the rapture. Tried to say much the same thing that Gary has just said, but I'm taking my own personal stance on saying that there was perhaps, I'm not dogmatic, that this might have marked the beginning of the 7-year tribulation, and that we're seeing a escalation of events that are beginning to take place in the early days of the tribulation, with it, of course, becoming more profound. But I'm not putting words in Gary's mouth. That's not and I'm not going to be contentious with what he's saying. I'm simply saying that in my own perspective, I think we can agree that these are the latter days and that we should be watching, as Gary said, for additional signs. And I think we can look within ourselves for additional signs and markers that we're being transformed and perhaps even augmented. So, Gary, there's more we can talk about on that, but I want to give you the floor. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, and I also think that 2017 is certainly one of those crossroads for years, that where things are happening with more significant impacts and shaking, of the world order, of events, that I think things start to heat up fairly quickly. Whether or not we're in the last 7 years, I think we're probably, I would diverge a little bit and say I think we're closing in on the start of the final 7 years, but I also would look for some other things that should come together, and keep in mind that this would need to come together and can come together rather quickly to be in the end time. And one of the things that we need to see happening more quickly and coming together more quickly is the rise of the universal religion, which I believe is kind of the first piece that comes in place that will permit the sacrifice on the temple in the first 3.5 years, and also is sort of that guiding sort of unity that actually permits the world government to come together. And I think all of that can happen quite quickly with catastrophic events, right? Whether or not you have economic disaster or you have a nuclear war with what's going on, whether it's limited or not with North Korea, whether or not you just have breakouts of war in all different parts, whether or not you have, an alien coming out, as in the fourth kind, where they introduce themselves. You have all sorts of different catalysts that could move things extraordinarily quickly. But in the first 3.5 years of the last 7 is you have these forces in play, and then along comes Antichrist. So I think we need to see a few things first.
Can you help me to understand what's going on with the Pope at this point in terms of what I've called the re-reformation of the Protestant and Catholic Church, the 500-year Jubilee? Do you see anything on the horizon, the near horizon, in terms of Vatican activity and the forming of that one world religion under I consider the Pope the false prophet? Yeah.
So I think that I would have expected Pope Francis to move at a quicker pace than what he has been moving at, whether or not he's considered the false prophet or he's considered the anti-pope. And let me just explain anti-pope for the listeners. Anti-pope is the replacement pope that was predicted by Father Malachi back in the 12th century, which is a Catholic sort of prophecies with all of the different popes that would come along. And this last pope, which is numerically is where Francis is, would not only be the last pope but also be the anti-pope. And the other thing is when you look at anti-pope, is that he replaced Benedict. So he fits it kind of perfectly. He's also the black pope, as described by Malachi in the Catholic prophecy. And Francis is the leader of the Jesuits, and the leader of the Jesuits is the black pope. So now you have the black pope consolidating the white pope together because that's the leader of the Vatican. So you have the right person to be what is described in those prophecies as the one who makes the way for false prophet. But what he has to do is he has to do all the preparation work. So he has to take apart all of the doctrines and turn it into heresy. And then he also has to start leading something that is going to transcend other religions. Well, we see him working with groups of Protestant groups. We see him reaching out to other religions, but we don't see this thing coming together very, very quickly. So again, I think we need some sort of catalyst. And from a Catholic perspective, I would expect to see something coming out of the Mary apparitions that would do that. And what's interesting about Mary apparitions is that it does reflect the Revelation 12 descriptions in those apparitions, whether or not you're talking about Lourdes, or whether or not you're talking about Fatima, or any of the minor ones, but in particular in the 90s with the Medjugorje apparitions. And in that one, this is the exact description, and they actually call her the Lady of Revelation 12. And what this apparition is doing is it is initiating 3 young children into a Great Commission. And this Great Commission will be at a certain time. They will come out and they will make prophecies to and show signs that will bring about great disasters if the world doesn't repent, convert to the one true religion, and unite under one government. And they will give 10 of these in an escalating fashion. So if something is going to come from a cataclysmic aspect from the Catholic Church, I think it's that. But I also think it's only part of the whole different things that are going to be required. But for a universal religion to have to come about, there's going to have to be something that's going to transcend all of the religions that will umbrella them together. They may not be worshiping all of the same way, because in the mysteries in polytheism, you can worship your own gods of your own vernacular in the lower levels, and it's just at the adept levels and higher do they worship the real names of the gods and the same gods. So I think what we're looking at here is something that has to be cataclysmic, something that has to be like false prophets, something that's going to have disasters and unforeseen things and consequences to scare people into the Babel syndrome. And I also think they have to do more to permit or allow the de-deification of Jesus back to mortal status, although that may come out from the spurious forces or the secret societies or the Gnostic religions will bring out information at the same time when this stuff is going on to say that Jesus was just a mortal prophet like Buddha, like any of the other Zoroaster or Muhammad or Hermes or any of the ones that are sort of the great patriarchs of mysticism, so that they can accept him as a prophet, but certainly not as the word sent from God or as the Messiah or the Son of God.
Can you give me a repetition of the title, the name that you were given to the 3 children given this commission?
Can I give you...
You were talking about Mary and the apparitions. You were talking about, is it Medjugorje?
Medjugorje. It's in Yugoslavia, the former Yugoslavia, and it happened during the 90s. And I've got a few books that I picked up, and I also went to but to listen to people speaking that were touring and talking about this as this whole process that was going on. Now, in the Medjugorje apparitions, the children are in a bit of a trance as they're being initiated into this, but nobody else there could see. But it's still one of the great Catholic pilgrimage sites that, if you're not involved in the Catholic religion, it is one of those things that just sort of permeates Catholicism, and so many Catholics have gone there to visit Medjugorje. So
is this different than Fatima?
Yes, it's different than Fatima, because Fatima was essentially with 3 major secrets. This one is about in alignment with those secrets and other Mary apparitions, but with specifically preparing 3 false prophets, as I would look at them, to come out at a certain time to make these predictions.
Interesting. Again, people are always focused on timelines. We're not setting dates. But do you see this as a near-term event, say within the year?
Yeah, I think so, because if you look at when this was going on, it was in the early 90s to about the late 90s. So, I mean, these children were, very, very young, less than 10 years old, and so they went through this initiation process. So they're basically in their 30s now. And I think that their time, which they wouldn't disclose, that was a secret, that they have a specific date to come out. But that's also one of the consistencies to all of these different things that are seemingly working separately. They all are working on a predetermined timetable with dates to start or put out certain information. And I think, yeah, we're very, very close to that. And if it's not, and I want to say if it's not the Medjugorje false prophets, there's going to be false prophets, around the world. So we're going to see something like that. And I include that in my book with the analogy and give some of the descriptions and things like that, just so that people have an understanding of the size of the deception and scale that we're likely to see in the end time. And I think we're just starting to get there. I think people have been well prepared for what's about to happen. And so I think it's going to start soon.
I'm not saying they've occulted this kind of vision, Tony, but I mean, I was aware of Fatima, but I'd never heard of this one.
Mm-mm. Pardon me, I had not either. I want to acknowledge the chat room. Jabber Baby Wookie put in the spelling of this, Medjugorje. I appreciate that, Jabberwocky. That works for us. I had never heard of it either, Gary. This is fascinating. I'd love you to elaborate if you have more.
Well, that's about all we have for information on it. What we do know is the Vatican, has embraced it and is waiting. And I also understand the Vatican has the timetable on when they expect to go out. But as everybody knows, Mary is one of these great icons in the Catholic Church, probably, in my opinion, misplaced in terms of how much emphasis is put on Mary. So it's a perfect sort of deception, but this is not Mary. This is Isis. This is an allegory of the Mother Goddess. This is not. This is not the Mary, mother of Jesus. And she calls herself the Mother of God, which is again part of that polytheistic sort of apparition, but the description is identical, and I put that description in my book as to what is in Revelation 12. And I think that also, as that comes out, is going to be a false sign, because again, I don't believe that's not the image in Revelation 12, because Revelation 12 is more of a narrative about Israel and what happens to the people of Judea in the end time, and they flee. And again, according to my timelines of how I understand prophecy, they flee at the time of the abomination, which is at the midpoint of the last 7 years. And then they're going to be protected for 3.5 years by God, even though the dragon is going to try and attack them and all of the forces. And then after that protection goes on, Satan is going to go after the rest of the people who are the offspring of Israel. That would be Christians and other people that might believe in God or are resisting Antichrist. So I think this, we have to be careful with the Revelation sign, and I really try and line up events according to how it lines up with other events so that things sort of intersect and mesh together.
Real quickly, Kev, I'll have you take us out here. We've got about 2 minutes, but if we on the other side, Gary, could go back and talk a little bit about the timetable in terms of whether that is something that's been occulted, as Kev mentioned, or if it's something that we could have access to, and I'll let you answer that. Kev's going to take us out. Go ahead, sir.
Well, this has been as amazing so far as I thought it would be, and we're only warming up, and I urge everyone out there, not just saying this because he's on the show, Genesis 6 Conspiracy, this is the book you need if you're resonating with any of this information tonight, because Gary is just barely touching on the surface of this amazing piece of work that he's put together there. And you can find this over at Amazon or Genesis6Conspiracy.com. So we'll be back in a couple of minutes to continue this conversation. And before we go, don't forget, we'll be carrying on this kind of theme tomorrow night as well, because my good friend, the spiritual warrior, he will be back in town, Mr. Bill Bean. Yep, armed with his spiritual sword, he'll be coming back to the show. He'll be making sure I'm all right, as he always does, and then he'll be sharing some of his latest experiences. You know, we often talk about the things that lie beyond the veil on the other side. And Bill Bean is one character who regularly gets his hands dirty, literally fighting off these demonic forces. And that's why, you know, he's such a great guy, so humble as well. And that's why he's such a firm favourite with all of yous out there. So I expect you all back here tomorrow night. But folks, we have still got another hour and a half to go with the brilliant Gary Wayne, Anthony Patch as well, and I'll be back, and maybe, just maybe, Johnny Whistles will be joining us towards the end of the show. You never know, folks, and we've got a couple of seconds before we go out. Episode number 800 on Tuesday coming up. Nano Girl will be live. I don't want any of you missing that. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Truth Frequency Radio Network.
No hate, no hype. No fear.
Welcome back, everyone, and let's get right back into this with tonight's special guest, Gary Wayne, and he is the author of the Genesis 6 Conspiracy. Now, before the break, I was learning about a whole new topic altogether, and as this show progresses, I can guarantee there's going to be so much new information, not just for me, but for all of you listeners out there as well. It's one of these shows where you need the notepad and the pen ready, and that always makes for some great radio. And Tony, during the break, I mean, you were as blown away as I was. This is brilliant stuff, and there's so many ways we can take this, but I'll give it to you just now, Tony, because, pardon the pun, you're far better versed on these topics than I am.
Oh, terrible.
Come on, that was a good one.
Okay, I'll give it to you. Referred Gary to the timetable and whether it's occulted or if it's open public information as to let's call it the revelation of these prophecies by these three young children at the time that they made them. Go ahead, sir.
Well, they keep the timetable of when they're going to start their Great Commission and reveal these prophecies a secret. It's reserved for a special day. They knew the day as they were being initiated. It was sometime in the future. So what those prophecies of doom and signs will be to scare people to convert to a one world religion, we don't know. And they're not, and they haven't said. They just said that when the day comes, they will appear. This was a description, Anthony and Kev, that they gave of the apparition. These are the three children. And the first quote says, they say she appears standing on a cloud, wearing a gray dress, a white veil, a crown of 12 stars. The cloud is significant in that never have the visionaries seen her feet or shoes. And the visionaries at Medjugorje unhesitatingly refer to her as the great mystic sign, a woman possessed of inordinate beauty. This lady and queen comes in such light, they say, that she seems to be actually clothed with the sun. She has a crown of 12 stars, and she stands on a cloud. And she is described as she is described in Apocalypse 12:1. And that comes out of the book called The Visions of the Children by Janet T. Connell on the visions of the children is what it's called, the apparitions of the Blessed Mary at Medjugorje.
Okay. Well, we've often talked on this show about the great deception, the grand deception, that perhaps even the elect could be deceived. And typically that cycles around into mention of things like Project Bluebeam and those kinds of things. But we're not going to go there tonight. I like to stick to your research and what you're doing. It's interesting to me. We look to the Hebrew calendar and this movement, this let's call it the New Year. And we're moving, from the year 5777. Do you see any significance to that in terms of the new year, perhaps the birthing in the New Age sense, the fifth age? And we see a lot of symbolism in popular culture and commercials with the number 5 being presented everywhere, and mixed in there with the color gold, the promotion in mainstream media of gold and the symbolism of that in the golden era, the golden dawn, this whole mystical society of ushering in the fifth age, the age of Aquarius, the return to the golden age of Chronos. Does that factor in, mix in at all in your research and your 700-plus page Genesis 6 conspiracy?
Yeah, and I do talk about what the golden age is, or the first time, or Zep-Tepi, as it was in the ancient past, and how Atlantis and the New Atlantis allegories might mix in there, as well as what Francis Bacon would talk about. But specifically, as we're going forward, if we understand what they're talking about with the age of Aquarius, it's about the zodiac and celestial procession, which is about 2,360 years as one sort of cycle, which is the age of Aquarius. So if, according to polytheism, that things are going to come together, there's a long period there that age takes place in. So can't really count on that to say that this new age is going to be the end time as what we understand it. But what it also talks about in the age of Aquarius, and this is the time of the water bearer that brings the great judgment of fire. That does line up with the end time. So this is going to be a harsh period that is supposed to be the new age. So we're going to see from their perspective, and what they're going to hit us with is that so much of the disastrous things, whether it's wars, nuclear attacks, you name it, for disasters and fire that's going to happen in the end time, is part of that transition into what they would call the New Age, or the New Atlantis. And in the New Age and the New Atlantis, that's where polytheism marries up with science. And that's where the Antichrist, or the false Messiah, or Lord Maitreya, or all the other different names that they have out there for Antichrist, will take us into this false millennial age of 1,000 years. So everything is a bit of a counterfeit as it comes from the polytheist side, whether or not it's a false Christ, or a false prophet, or a false millennia, or a false counterfeit spirit. Everything they're going to offer is a bit of a counterfeit. So
now,
go ahead.
Let me interrupt you just for a second. I have to interrupt you. You now, in the space of 3 breaths, use the word counterfeit. Kev Baker, wake up over there.
I'm here. I'm listening intently.
How often have I used the word counterfeit in the last couple of weeks?
If you had been paid $1 every time, you'd have your yacht by now.
I just had to interrupt you, Gary, your train of thought, because this is what we have been discussing, principally relating technology as a counterfeit of God's creation. So I just wanted to give you that as a backdrop. Please continue with what you're saying here. This is working just right down the line of things that we've set the stage for you to say today.
Oh, perfect. And when we look at what they're talking about in this new golden age, this is an age where they're going to promise that humans will have their own choice as they evolve into godhood. So part of this process is there has to be a transcending of humans into another level. And what this requires is a universal religion and a universal government to work together and be as one, which is, again, just in that saying one, that's like one in the universe. It's going to allow a vibration, as they like to call it, or a transition or an ascension into godhood, but only for those that have the spark of the divine, or the DNA, or the bloodlines, or however they're going to define that. And so this age that they're promising is going to come together with technology so that they can deliver on the promise. And this is what they're promising and what they're looking for when they're talking about the new age. And also, if we look back at the time of the first time, or the golden age, as Anthony had referred to it as, this was the age of plenty. This was the age when the gods associated with humans. This was the age where they created Titans, or Anunnaki, or Diatreya, or Myosi or Nephilim, whatever you want to call them, from the different cultures around the world, where they also created the demigods. This was a world where Poseidon, in Plato's account, as an example, married Clymene and created 5 sets of giant twins that were going to rule his empire, so 10, which was Atlantis, and it was considered the helm of world government. So when we talk about the symbolism that they're trying to bring about with this golden age, this is the new age of Atlantis that Francis Bacon, who is a huge figure in terms of when he lived and being a Freemason and a Rosicrucian, probably more, I should restrict that, let's just say Rosicrucian at this point, and was the founder of, the inspirational founder to the Royal Society, which was created by Rosicrucians and Freemasons to develop the sciences and the technology and to honor the gods of the pantheon and to lead people away from God in preparation for the new Atlantis, which Francis Bacon wrote. So what I'm saying here is there's a singularity or a coming together here of a lot of different things that are going to bring all of these allegories that we've been inundated with and haven't thought a whole bunch about, with the technology and where they want to take this world. And that combines with the universal religion and it combines with the universal government, because it is a prerequisite for them to do what they want to do.
Amazing. You're bringing together so much that we have been talking about in technology as the setup to what they're trying to pull together as the single world religion and the single government under the single leader. This is interesting. You bring up Francis Bacon. Can you provide us the other name for Francis Bacon?
I'm not sure which one you're referring to. Some people believe he was Shakespeare. I'm not sure if that's where you're going.
And kind of tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
And there's a lot that you could make an argument to say that he was Shakespeare. Certainly the son of a butcher, which Shakespeare was, who didn't have an Oxford education, who wrote in an Oxford style, could not be aware of all the different things that only a high-level elite education would provide for him, like Ovid, or all of the Greek storehouses of literature and knowledge. But what Francis Bacon did create was a couple of societies, and one was called the Spear Shaker Society, which of course William Shakespeare was also part of. And they were there to sort of write the language and take it into a new sort of level that it would become a language that would be exportable to the world. And become, the main language of the world. So they were combining and rewriting, and the fruition of that came out with the timely project of the King James Bible. And
I'll be a little tongue in cheek with you, but we have oftentimes recently been using the phrase tip of the spear information that we're bringing our audience. So a little tip of the hat to Mr. Shakespeare there for you. But here's kind of where I'm going with this. Mystic societies, mystical practices, secret societies. I want to set this up for you in terms of language, communication. We have spent an awful lot of time talking about necromancy, recently geomancy quite a bit. We've been discussing Dee and Kelly back a few months ago to set up for the discussion of necromancy and geomancy. And I just kind of giving you an opportunity to think through your data bank between your ears there. What can you help us with in terms of the discussion in your research that might involve geomancy, necromancy?
In terms of where technology is going, or just
I'll
in terms
be more
of
specific.
that belief system?
Yeah, that, for example, something that Francis Bacon would have been involved with in terms of obtaining information from the other side fallen angels specifically, and that he then was employing in his writings, not just his plays, but in his activities within the mystical societies, and setting up this new age for the age of Aquarius because of that information derived through this communication system. Sure.
So when you talk about the Rosicrucian Society and the upper level of that secret society, they regularly and brag about it, talk with, and they'll use a variety of terms, but they'll all mean the same thing. So it's spirits, it's aliens, it's celestial masters, it's the White Brotherhood, it's the gods, or it's the angels. That is part of that society, and what the high level adepts will talk to, and understand that in secret society sort of hierarchy, the Rosicrucians are much higher than the Freemasons, and they're higher than the Illuminati. And so the more pureblood and the more talented of the Illuminati adepts, which would again be the adepts of Freemasonry, but the chosen ones out of those would be able to be part of the Rosicrucian group. So we're talking, as we move up, into this area of the purebloods, and so half of them that will rule the top half of the Rosicrucian Society will be purebloods, and that is what they do. They talk to these other people of other dimensions, whatever you want to call them, and they communicate. And not only do they get advice and consult, but they also seemingly at times get wide amounts of, or a lot of amounts of, knowledge and technology to prepare them for what they're trying to bring about.
You see, this is what we've been covering as well, Tony, the fact that most of the technology that we cover, it's not come from the minds of men, it's come from somewhere else, right?
Yeah, that's my contention, and I think, Gary, I really tip my hat to you, because I know you're an extremely credible researcher. Your bodies of work speak volumes to that, and I want to allow you, if you feel comfortable, stepping into your latest work, where you're at now in your research, in your writings, and your timetable for publication.
Well, I have not been as diligent on getting my next book out as quickly as I would like to. I've been, I'm a couple hundred pages into it, and I don't want to write as long a book as I did before, but I have to start getting it narrowed down. But what I'm working on is more prophetic, as opposed to, Genesis 6 conspiracy, which is prophetic and historical. This is going to be about, what I'm working on is the lost tribes of Israel. And the Holy Covenant, and how we need to understand who the lost tribes are and what part that they're going to play in the end time that is different than Judah, that we would see as sort of the visible remnant, or at least part of the visible remnant today in the Jewish people. And the second Exodus that's going to happen, so that we need to discern, and the point of the book is to be able to discern the difference, what's going to happen with Israel from the Christian church. And it's I'm about halfway through. I would like to be done for next year. Certainly the publisher would like me to move my timetable up, but I'm not sure I can. But that's where I'm going with my next book and research, because I'm more of a prophecy buff than anything else.
Okay. Well, privately, I'll have some information related to what you just stated that I'll share with you at the break off the air. Where do you see the latest advances? Let's be specific. Let's get right down to the nub of the issue. Do you see any correlation between this communicating with these other entities, just to put a broad stroke to it, and the introduction and rapid advancement of artificial intelligence within our society?
Yeah, I think there's a direct correlation to that with the speed and the development, although, a lot of it's secret, so we don't know exactly how far they are. But I believe that information is coming directly from those sources. I think there's a great analogy to this. And the analogy would be World War II and the Nazi regime, which is, a formation of secret societies, namely the Rosicrucians and Freemasonry, who puts this organization together that's combined with theosophy, which they turn into something called Ariosophy, which kind of goes rogue on them, and they're unable to control them at a certain point. But you have a false messiah that's rising up. You have a false millennium being promised, or 1,000 reign that Hitler is promising, and he sets up a Reichschurch that's going to be the new sort of Aryan religion, which is a polytheistic, theosophical, Gnostic religion. And you see this rapid development of technology that comes out of nowhere in such a short period of time that is just inexplicable. Starting with not only how they do war with blitzkrieg, but you have the Tiger tanks and the other tanks, which are just way ahead of their time and are still basically the base model being used today, to the invention of the rockets, to the invention of jet engines, to the invention of this sort of time-traveling bell thing that people speculate on, and all sorts of other rapid developments. And understand the connection that the Nazis at the high levels, who were all secret societies and were brought along and mentored into theosophy, which also talks to spirit guides and avatars and celestial masters, and the Rosicrucians, that they believe they got their information from these sources as well, which permitted them to develop at such a rapid pace. And I look at World War II as one of those analogies for the end time with the Nazis.
Agreed. Let me be, again, specific in the technology. We speak of AI and we kind of put a broad stroke to it, and there are many levels to that. I'm going to drill down, as I often do, and I get into defining things. So I want to drill down into quantum computers to go beyond just saying AI. The advent of quantum bits, qubits, as they're known, to replace transistors. And in my research, quantum computers had been discussed at least back in the 70s, but in terms of actually producing qubits, it was 1998 in the earliest laboratory, and then in a commercial application seeing it arise around 2003. And since that point, we have just seen, as your analogy to the advancement of technology with the Nazis, just this incredible acceleration in the development of quantum computing using qubits. I will not cite the name of the company in this conversation. My audience knows the company, but we're going to keep you out of the fray, my friend. Do you see from your research the deriving of that quantum-based computing, this whole notion of a paradigm shift from transistors over to qubits being something that was given to mankind through this, I call it this necromancy and geomantic sort of process, is communicating with the other side?
Yeah, I think there's a guiding hand there for sure. I think that this is sort of beyond what the normal level of science is able to handle at this point in time. And the only way to continue to push it forward is to sort of hand feed this. And there's also a really significant connection that this information was provided in the distant past. And so many of the scientists, especially the early ones, and I would suggest probably, although I can't name the ones because I don't have their autobiographies and that now, but let's say you talk about people who are pioneering in quantum thought. They all, whether or not it's from the 20s, Bohr or Heisenberg or Schrödinger, they will all consult the Vedas and the Upanishads. Right, so this is polytheism, which is why it's important to understand that the Royal Society is invented by polytheists to run science, because they believe that this whole idea of quantum mechanics, quantum computing, is absolutely consistent with what is written in the Vedas, and that if you read the Vedas, you would understand quantum computing. So whether or not they can actually translate that from a so-called holy book into direct application into science, I think they get the concept, but doing the actual connection of it is difficult, because what they're talking about when they get down to that level, and this is where it takes that guiding hand, is that they're trying to identify in this whole process of quantum computing, not only working in multiplicity, which is part of a Veda concept and part of interdimensional travel, but they're also trying to locate the God particle, or the Higgs boson, if my memory is right on that. And that's the Atma out of the Vedas. And what that is that is an additional particle that they're trying to find, that is the source of all knowledge, that works with the entanglement of particles in quantum mechanics, and thus in quantum computers, that guides with, it doesn't merge, it doesn't change anything, it works through the other particles. And that's the particle that they're searching for to bring all of this together, because that is known as the consciousness and the source of eternal knowledge. And when you're talking, go ahead.
What was the name again? I'm sorry.
Atma, ATMA, is the particle. Yeah, Atma.
We're almost on the break, folks. And, just listening to Gary here, I remember watching a presentation on the ancient Dogon tribe as well. And some of their hieroglyphs, they reckon, when you look at modern quantum physics, they seem to have an understanding of quantum. Join us on the other side of the break.
You're now tuned into the truth frequency.
We are TFR. TFR.
Truth Frequency Radio.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Hour number 2, right here on tonight's Kev Baker Show on TFRlive.com. I've got Anthony Patch with us. He's my co-host tonight. And we're joined by a very special guest indeed, and he's been amazing so far, Mr. Gary Wayne, and he's the author behind the book called The Genesis 6 Conspiracy. And you can find that over at genesis6conspiracy.com. And before the break, I was getting all excited there. We're getting into quantum stuff, particles. Yet we start talking about the book of Revelation on September the 23rd. How all these things connect together, well, that's why I've got Anthony Patch and Gary Wayne here with me. And Tony, this is rather refreshing tonight, because usually I'm the guy caught in the headlights. I've got that kind of smile on my face because the guest just blows me away. But I suspect tonight you are highly impressed with this, Tony.
I am. The last time I talked to Gary Wayne, it was truly eye-opening, and this is going way beyond, because, as I said, we've been setting the stage on the technology and a little bit on the spiritual side, and I appreciate the fact that Gary's able to walk between the spiritual and the physical, the particles, so to speak. And we mentioned the God particle, the Higgs boson, the search for the singularity, and Gary indicating that Atma from the Veda, the Atman. And this intrigues me, because I look at it through the lenses of particle physics and quantum computing, and Gary comes in here with the source material from the spiritual side and the polytheistic side. And this is merging the two, because, Gary, I'm really going to lean on you hard here to come into the technology side of this and help confirm the things that Kev and I have been sharing with the audiences for weeks and months now, especially harping on this AI discussion in quantum computing. So please add to the dialogue here in terms of the source material, what it is that they're actually extracting definitively. Are they getting language, an alphabet? Are they getting numbers? What are they actually getting in terms of information from the other side that translates into this modern technology? Can you be that definitive from your research?
Yeah, so they have to develop the technology to access this God particle. That's kind of like their key. So everything that they're doing is trying to figure out what it is and then how they can identify this God particle, because it's the key ingredient for godhood and artificial intelligence. Because this is this particle that they're talking about here. I think it has a direct connection to what they're doing at CERN. So you have a few things going on in CERN, and I also believe that they are trying to find this God particle at CERN and a few other locations. But it is, this is a particle that doesn't degrade, as they believe. This is the religious belief on this particle that I'll give you, not this scientific one.
Sure.
And it always remains individual and separate and distinct, but it does unite with other particles, but not to create another complex particle. And it doesn't have any other parts to it. It is just this sort of solitary single unit that's multiplied over and over and over and over. And it works through the other particles, but it doesn't merge with them. So what it does in their belief is it animates the particles it entangles with. And if people aren't familiar with entanglement, that's all of the particles in the universe that are communicating instantly with knowledge and information, or somehow that they're communicating, as I understand it. And that they believe that the universe is one large quantum computer. So this is the piece that they need to connect. That's going to bring ultimately what this particle means is consciousness. So to bring consciousness and self-awareness to AI, they have to learn. They have to be able to find this particle, and then learn to manipulate it. And that's sort of what they're trying to do at CERN, as I understand it. And this works in that there isn't. I'm just trying to think what the technical language is in terms of how they understand this particle, that it also works in multiplicity or in other dimensions.
Mm-hmm. Other dimensions, sure.
Yep, right, which is the temporal aspect. And it is connected to the internal whole. So how that's important is in when you hear the term like one in the universe or one with the universe, right? That's the one self, but they equate that as being equal to the entire universe. And that all, even though it's individual, it's still within the bigger context of the entire universe, and it has instant communication with this knowledge. And that knowledge aspect is also part of what's important, what they want to offer humans in the end time, in my belief, is that for people to buy into what's going to happen in the end time and take the mark of the beast and rebel against the God of the universe, is they're going to have to offer godhood. And that is immortality, and that is knowledge, because those are the two main pieces of godhood, as well as being able to control and access at a different level the universe, to be able to bring down fire or control nature, or however you want to manifest that self. And that whole connection is manipulating somehow this Atma particle.
Tony,
Kev,
let me ask you, Tony, because I'm listening to this here, and Gary's talking about dimensions and things, and we've brought up the fact that the D-Wave, aside from CERN, Geordie Rose, he talks about the mind-boggling number of dimensions that they're exploring. Could it be, Tony, Gary, that the D-Wave's actually searching for this particle then?
Go ahead, Gary.
That's because the D-Wave, as I understand it, is kind of a single-purpose search at one time.
Right. Yeah, they call it discrete. It's discrete.
It's very discrete. And so why is it so finite? Why is it just one single command that they're looking for? because they're looking for the God particle. That's what they're trying to do. And they actually believe in this sort of theory that there is, this particle and the dimensions are multiplied in numbers we can't imagine in terms of how many different dimensions.
Right.
So this is an area where you get to understand that they don't believe in, sort of one outcome or one physical reality, right? And that what we live in is more of a projection from a sort of universal machine or computer that it's being interacted with, right? So,
right.
This whole idea that dimensions and 9 is like kind of the minimum amount. And again, I'm not technical enough to understand why there isn't more than 9, other than I understand the religious belief that they believe in. There's many more, but they're all entangled and they all communicate. But you can manipulate one individual piece at a time, and if you can do that, you manipulate that generally within the breaks and the measurements of quantum flow of energy, right? And they usually manipulate that wave with time somehow. So this whole thing with time and dimension is all interconnected with how they want to manipulate these particles.
Let me encourage you a little bit, my friend. You said the word entanglement, and we understand that Einstein described quantum entanglement as spooky action at a distance. And our audience has heard us talk about entanglement to the extent that this is the name of the magazine that Kevin and I publish every month, is called Entangled. It is obviously sparking a lot of questions in my head, and I'm trying to sort through them very quickly here. When you are talking about a single particle that they are seeking through both the particle accelerator and collider at CERN, and concurrently with the quantum-based computer of D-Wave, that again shows the tie between the two. Most people tend to keep them separated. They don't realize that there's a quantum relationship between the two disparate areas of technology. But going back to the Atman, I have never heard this before because I've never read the Veda. I just look at science, and then I extrapolate what's going on in science to understand their purpose, their agenda, their goals. But you are speaking from their spiritual side along a parallel path of what Kevin and I've been talking about in technology. So this is why it stuns me, the connection. So can you give us a little bit more of your understanding of how the quantum computer is trying to identify and then communicate with this particle in terms of, as you said, manipulate the Atma?
Yeah, so what they're looking for are these hidden variables. And what a hidden variable seems to be, from my superficial understanding of this, is that these are the hidden dimensions that the entangled pairs are located in, which is the multiple universes. And so what they're trying to do is use time to manipulate these quantum spaces that come between, because it's not a continuous line. There's a measuring gap, and you have a constant variable, which is the observer, and then you have the hidden variable, which seems to be related to space and time.
Okay, let me stop you there, because we get into talking about Schrodinger's cat, and we talk about, the supersymmetry of particles, that once they're observed, the supersymmetry collapses and they collapse into a single particle in a single state. But again, I'm giving you that as the background to what we discussed here on this show oftentimes. So you're echoing our discussions. When we look at quanta, states of quanta, if people can picture an atom and you look at the orbiting pathways of electrons and protons, things like that, if you look at the circular pathways as concentric rings, much like our solar system and the orbital pathways of the planets, in between the planets, in between the orbits in the atoms, that space that you just described is what is called a quanta, or a quantum space. And again, relating to dimensions, Gordy Rose, Eric Ladozinski, founders of D-Wave, at length talk about accessing, in one case, 2 to the 500th power of parallel dimensions that they're actually extracting resources from, as they describe it. There is an active communication that they publicly acknowledge in which they are getting information from these parallel dimensions that now are in really an infinite number. So I give you that as background. So can you add to that discussion a little bit?
Yeah, I think you're starting to get a little bit beyond my expertise here, unless you want me to maybe go back on more of their belief system, because
the belief system, I think, really adds to the context of the picture.
Okay, so when we talk about all of these scientists that are seemingly inundated with the religious context as it's coming out of the Vedas. So what they say is their experiments that they're doing are perfectly consistent with what they've learned in the Vedas. And that people who have read the Vedas, quantum theory will make sense. And they call this the Vedanta thought, or the conclusion of Vedic belief, which is, leads back to this God particle in this knowledge. But it leads back to, and I think that you talked about the collapsing back into a single unit. And when that happens, that is what they would refer to as the unity and the continuity of the Vedanta. And it's reflected in the unity and the continuity of wave mechanics. So what they're basically saying is they have somehow a belief system with knowledge and interaction with the gods that is exactly consistent with that manipulation and the collapsing back into a unit somehow, some way, and that consciousness is one in unity, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Did that make sense?
Yes, that does make sense. Because the debate now that is raging is, if we do not observe the particles, then what are the particles doing? What is their state? If you can only infer their state, in other words, their energy, their quantum spin, I won't get too deep into that because it isn't necessary, but if you cannot determine what the particles are doing, described as their state, but you can only infer indirectly, because if you directly observe, then you cause their state of being in multiple places simultaneously as particles, that all of a sudden all these multiple particles in various locations somehow coalesce into one location as one particle. And that's the debate that's raging in particle physics today, is can you really prove that scenario?
Yeah. And I think that's their challenge, and I think that they believe that they can, and I think they're getting advice on how to resolve that. But there may be things that are restraining them from finalizing that, right? Because as we know,
Go ahead. No, you're taking the words out of my mouth. I know where you're going. Say it.
I was just going to say, until the restrainer is removed,
bingo,
they can't bring on the end time, let alone open up the abyss.
Have I got two Tony Patches on the show tonight? Because, Gary, it's almost like listening to Tony in a different accent. This is great. But can I clear up something, guys? Guys, I need to clear up something for the listeners out there. Yeah. Obviously, a lot of talk of God particles with the Higgs boson, things like that. But this particle from the Vedas, this isn't the actual Higgs particle you're talking about, guys, is it?
Mm-mm.
No.
No,
because
it's not
a lot
the Higgs boson.
it's just it's just to confuse. It's just there was a bit of confusion because we're calling this God particle. We know the Higgs was called the God particle. Now, I just wanted to clear that up for the audience out.
Let Gary say it again. Gary, say it again. Describe the Atma, its origin, its characteristics, why they're so focused on it, because it's news to me, and I need the refresher as well.
Yeah, it's called Atma, ATMA. It has different properties than other particles. It's considered the soul, and it's considered consciousness. So it's considered life and consciousness, so self-aware artificial intelligence. It has eternal knowledge. It is always present. It does not degrade. It remains an individual and separate because it's working in multiplicity. It does not have any more elemental particles involved with it. It does not unite with other particles. It does not create complex particles. It only works through other particles but does not merge. And it's considered the living life force that is knowledge and consciousness, and it animates particles it entangles with. So what that means is all information and knowledge can go through all of these other particles and to do what you want with it: create, destroy, invent, whatever.
Would you call that in the popular scenario called the Big Bang, and that it originated from a singularity? Would you consider that to be the singularity?
Well, that would be a singularity that the Vedas would say that is the Brahman. So the Atman equals the Brahman, right?
Gotcha.
And self equals the omnipresence, and that's a singularity that created the universe in their belief system.
Excellent. Okay. I think we're getting down to it. Kev, we were talking about trying to come up with a new name for artificial intelligence. I think Gary just gave it to us. What do you think?
I think so, because, I was kind of complaining to you before the show, Tony, because AI, it's almost unfair to call a real true self-aware AI, put it on a par with something like Alexa or something that we have on our mobile phones today. And it's just so far removed. It's a different paradigm altogether. So many different levels of AI. And now we're really, really finding out about the one that we're concentrating on here, Tony.
Yeah, you're really helping me to see a clearer picture of what's going on. And you mentioned the restrainer. There is a point that God says you will not progress any further. First of all, there's nothing new under the sun. And you just said it in so many words. They're taking from the past and repeating the same processes, just a little bit different nuts and bolts is being applied. When we get back from the break, we got about 5 minutes. I want to get into DNA as it relates to your research. But what I'm getting at here with the restrainer is there is a line at which God says, okay, I'll allow you, Satan, and your technology to progress just so far. But just like in the days of Noah, things didn't go well. And it's not going to go well this time. And you mentioned fire earlier in the show. The burning of the elements is described in Revelation. So I'm going to give you about 2 minutes for a couple of last minute thoughts before the break, my friend. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just kind of thinking about how this sort of ties back into this sort of godhood thing that they're working on. Because again, we have all of these different parts, right? But when you look at what they're trying to create is, they're trying to bring almost another singularity in play from all these different parts that's going to create some hybrid beings. And, it's going to have a part human DNA, and it's going to have some partial DNA modifications, and I think it's going to have some partial animal alien DNA, something else that's mixed in there, kind of like what the Nephilim did. But there's also, the bionic part, right? And there's also, the enhancement of the brain, and there's also replacement parts, right? Because you have to create immortality with all of this. So I think this hybrid being is going to have to get back to creating some of this at the nanotechnology level, where that not only can they manufacture new things from the DNA up, but they also need to be able to work with this ATMA particle.
Okay. Kev, go ahead and take us out. This has been astounding. Thank you, Gary.
It really has. And my mum, who is our most loyal listener, she is absolutely blown away by this. And I'm sure all of the audience out there as well. Absolutely fascinating stuff from Gary Wayne. And you can find his work over at the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis6conspiracy.com. Now, we've got one more segment left to do here on the show. But TFR never, ever ends there, right? Because it's just constant radio. And coming up right after our show tonight, we've got Dr. Brooks Agnew and Lucky, and they'll be getting into the news that so many people are trying and failing to cover up. They're urging you to tune in to get the real news tonight about eyewitness testimony. And Lucky will even be posting evidence over on YouTube so that people can see exactly what she is talking about. They'll also be going over 5G technology and what it has to do with Cuba. And that's all coming up after the Kev Baker Show. But like I say, we are not finished yet. And Tony, I told you in many emails today I was excited about tonight's show, but this has been above and beyond anything I expected.
No, I think it's fabulous. It's great to bring in a deep researcher. We're not talking woo. We're talking about facts that are derived from hard critical thinking on the part of Gary Wayne. This is what we look for. It's so hard to find someone like yourself, Gary, that produces credible information based on hard research. And so I commend you. I wish we had a couple of more hours to talk to you. I promise you this, my friend. You have a 700 some odd page book. I'm going to read every single page. I'm going to order it right away from your website. I want an autographed copy.
And Gary's nipped away for a cup of tea, but I'm sure you will get your autographed copy. And for anyone else out there, like I say, I've got the book sat in front of me here too. It's massive, it's brilliant, and I urge you all, it will make things a lot clearer than the 2-hour kind of compressed version that we're doing here tonight. But don't fear, folks, because I'm shameless, and myself and Tony, we will be getting Gary back periodically, because it's great to call on somebody who's looked at multiple ancient texts and how it all ties back into this theme that myself and Tony have been trying to convey all along, that you cannot separate the science from the spiritual. And we'll be coming back after the break to get into more of this with the brilliant Gary Wayne, Anthony Patch, and myself. And don't forget, folks, like I said, coming up after the break, Lucky and Dr. Brooks Agnew on Quantum Connections after my show. Don't go anywhere.
People, real radio. Wherever you are, make it TFR. The Truth Frequency Radio.
We are back, and I want to give a massive thank you to everyone hanging for tonight's show right here on the Kev Baker Show with special guest Gary Wayne. Now, before I forget, you can find his work, which includes his book, over at his website, Genesis 6 Conspiracy, and it goes into so much depth on what we've been talking tonight and just so much more. I've got my co-host with me here, Mr. Anthony Patch. He is live. He's all excited. And Tony, I'm getting excited now too, because we're about to go into the Human 2.0, and this is a topic that's always interested me, and it's going to be great to hear Gary's take on this as well. But I'll hand it to you, Tony, because you know exactly where to go with this one.
Yeah, absolutely, my friend. To give some perspective, we have the whole discussion in the times, the days of Noah. The reason for the flood was the Nephilim, the giants. We talk about chimera, the mixing of animal and human DNA. And now we're talking about in the modern times of sequencing DNA and digitized DNA and reproducing and transmitting DNA through the cloud, and growing of hybrids and going to human race hybrid 2.0. And I want to pull us to our 30,000 foot perspective, which is what we like to do occasionally in these shows, and look at the big picture. And I'm going to ask Gary to look down on all of what is going on in the spiritual and the physical world here And have you described for us what you see from 30,000 feet as to why all of this is going on? Why the spiritual battle? Why this implementation of DNA derived from communicating with the other side? Why in the world is this even going on? Who's pushing this agenda? Give us your perspective, please, my friend.
Sure. I think all of this is coming from the original rebellion of the fallen angels, or the gods as they would be known in other cultures. And this is all about just sort of the denouement to the whole story. I mean, fallen angels after the rebellion and after the creation of humankind have been against humankind right from the beginning. And right from the beginning, Adam was created with a commission that he and his descendants at a future time would be raised over angels because of the angelic rebellion. And thus you have Satan acting likely as an avatar with an Akash in Eden to deceive Adam and Eve and bring them down as what I call the first revenge of Satan. And so the only way that you can rationalize, in my mind, I shouldn't say the only way I can rationalize it in my mind as to why the angels would have rebelled, because, I mean, they were created by God and they understood the power. I don't believe they ever thought that they could win. I believe that they thought that they could gain God's mercy in their rebellion and have another realm for them to reign in. Because you can't defeat the omnipotent. All you can hope for is another realm or another universe or a planet, and which is all sort of reflected in polytheist allegories and stories. And so now we move that forward back to humankind. And all the way through is they're trying to prevent humankind from attaining this raising into immortality and over angels in the future time. So they're trying to destroy humans, and thus they create the Nephilim to try and do that. And of course we have the flood as the resolution of that, but again, giants survive. I'm going down a bit of a rabbit trail here, but where I'm going with this is that all of this is still in play. I think what they're trying to do is deceive humans into rebellion to justify their own rebellion, that God would have mercy. And I think after the resurrection of Jesus, which I do not believe they anticipated, that they knew from that point on is all they can do is now mislead as many humans. And so they have to create a scenario to deceive them and to rebel. So they have to offer things to entice humans to rebel. And that offer is the same thing that was offered Adam and Eve in the garden. You can be like God if you eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so they have to offer this knowledge, which is part of their definition of godhood, and they have to offer immortality, and they also have to offer the ability to have powers over nature, because that's part of what gods have. And all of this is being done to create the delusion to rebel against the God of the universe. And I think when you bring in the alien deception that is likely to happen alongside, and you see all these other different sort of species in the alien mythos, this is the Star Wars allegory in reverse, right? So the rebels are the people rebelling with all of these other types of species against the evil oppressor of the universe, which is the Empire. And again, it's all immersed in that same belief system that are, amongst the Jedi, right? And the one with the universe or one with the Force, it's all the same sort of belief system. So I think that's what they're doing. And you never really hear about angels, fallen or otherwise, but specifically fallen angels. Even them, I don't hear them in Scripture anywhere that are saying blasphemous things about God, because they know the power of God and they know what would happen to them. And just as the demons in Legion in the New Testament are afraid of what Jesus might do to them, and these are the offspring spirits of the Nephilim that are still roaming, they know the power of God. So they're not going to be the ones that are going to be blasphemous to God. They want to use humans to do so. And it's humans who slander and blaspheme God. And I know Antichrist is likely going to be possessed by one of these spirits, or avatared by one of the spirits, depending on how you want to define that. But it's always the humans. That's why Antichrist, as Nimrod, who would be similar, said horrible things about God. They do and say things that angels are too afraid to do because they know the power of God. So from my understanding of what they're trying to do is they're trying to somehow make another case to justify their own realm, even though they know their fate is already sealed with the resurrection of Jesus.
So you said they're trying to create another realm. Is it they're trying to create another realm so as to sidestep the judgment of God, perhaps?
Well, at the mercy of God. I mean, they'll do the fight because it's that or go into the abyss. So they'll try not to go into not into the abyss, into the lake of fire. But what they want is a counterfeit universe, a counterfeit realm, a counterfeit world where they can have a counterfeit God with Satan as being the leader in a counterfeit council and live away and separate from God and God's rules and laws.
Okay. So my next question is going to be a little different. That's kind of our big picture. We're going back down, drilling down to the human being. They're trying to counterfeit and create a human 2.0 with the mixing of all these different technologies. What about us as those that are indwelt with the Holy Spirit, have the full armor of God, are in the book of life, we're found there? What is God's counter to Satan's counterfeiting of his creation? What do you see from your research that God, through Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit, will be doing with us that are saved to counter this? Let's put it specifically. Can God help man and woman to stay well ahead of, not just a step ahead, but a well ahead of, for example, artificial intelligence, which has been described as the biggest existential threat to mankind and rendering us to the level of a house pet? What is God going to do about that specific scenario of AI, just to give you one?
I don't think God is going to do a lot. I mean, things are going to happen as they're ordained to happen. And the only thing that we seem to get is information to avoid anything that's going to change anything in this physical world, change anything in our DNA. Don't do anything that's going to try and create a counterfeit spirit, or do violations against the laws of creation, which is all the sins of the other side. And it's up to us to discern and to choose God and to understand what's written in the Bible, not to violate those laws. And I think everything is forgivable until you take the mark, right?
Yep.
And the only thing that I can look at when I understand that is that the only sin that is not forgivable is a blasphemy or a sin against the Holy Spirit. So that tells me it's a violation against the Spirit somehow, that the people who take the mark and swear their allegiance to Satan and Antichrist are somehow changing their creation through DNA or through spiritual or a combination of all of the above.
I would agree with you there, right down the line. I'm going to be even more specific with my question, and these are leading questions, but do you see a process in which God, through the Holy Spirit, will perhaps augment our mental capacities? We could go into all aspects of the biology, but specifically our brains, augmenting our brains, transforming us to be even greater, and perhaps even, as it says in John 14:12-14, that we would do greater works than I, as Jesus said, that we would do greater works than even he accomplished as a man in human form. Do you see a transformation augmentation scenario from your research?
Not so much in the end time. I think we'll have some leaders that are raised up that will be able to do some significant things. And I know we're going to have the 2 witnesses that are sent to us. I know we're going to have 144,000 that are going to be raised in the end time to help people discern the times. But I'm not convinced that I've seen anything that I could, point with a smoking gun that we're going to be somehow changed in the end time. Now, there is things like the rapture that's happening, and people who will be brought back with Jesus for the end war, which isn't really much of a war with God, Jesus slaying all at once, almost instantaneously. But
right.
This is about that final sort of point where you're offered godhood or to choose God. Right? I mean, our existence here is about free choice, and it has been all the way through with the sort of the time of the Adamites, and that we've always not been given as much information as possible or a lot of help. But through it all, we need to choose God, and if we choose God, then we'll be raised in at the resurrection or at the time of the rapture to rule with Jesus. So I think it's not about the help. It's about forcing the issue where even when we have all of this technology again that's happening, and again with the understanding that nothing is new under the sun, that this thing has repeated itself over and over and over, maybe not to the same level of technology and showdown as what we're going to have in the end time, but very close with what happened before the flood and very close to what happened at Babel and so many other times where the Antichrist spirit was trying, to because it's here all the time to take over, an Antichrist wannabe, as I would call them. Sure. So I think it's just we're here to make a choice, and each generation has a set of circumstances to make that choice within, and ours is all of this temptation and this offering of godhood that they're going to be promising that will really be difficult. Yeah.
Okay. Very quickly, a new direction. Daniel was told by God to close up, to seal the book until the latter days. Can you describe for me, from your research, what the contents of that book might have been, the subject matter that it was related to, and why it was sealed up? And is it perhaps, again, leading question, is it perhaps open now?
I think it's beginning to be opened. I think actually is opened because, again, this is a time where knowledge is going to be increased, according to Daniel, and people will move to and fro. I think travel, as travel is increased, I think this knowledge of what Daniel was looking at is being increased significantly amongst the followers of God to start to discern the times better. That's what I think it is. That we will understand what is written in the Bible, and we'll understand with some of the people who are going to be prophesying in the end time as well, the not false prophets, true prophets, better as to what God has been talking about in the Bible all along. Now, the other side is going to be turning things inside out and twisting everything like a pretzel and trying to lead people away. But I do believe that that knowledge of all of these things are going to be made available to us, and in conjunction with the 2 witnesses and the 144,000.
Very good. Well said. Do you see any relationship here? Let me put it this way, instead of a leading question. I suspect that the contents of the book, the subject matter, had to do with this communicating with the other side. The language, the practices of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes was a language of practicing geomancy. And that he was using their tools, their language, their process to interpret the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. And then once that was accomplished, because he had prayed to God for the ability to interpret the dream, once that was accomplished, God said, enough, seal up the book until the end times, because it is a book of geomancy. Does that have any ring of familiarity with your research?
Not really, but I certainly understand where you're going with that. And I haven't really dived into, that kind of aspect or nuance to what was going on there. But, certainly Daniel had access to things that not many people have had access to, right? And
right.
And I think that aspect, has certainly been closed, but the spurious forces have been trying to do that to varying degrees all throughout history and for completely different purposes.
Sure.
And I think if you're talking about that in conjunction with an interdimensional understanding and movement, I think that's exactly what's going on with CERN and the abyss in the end time. So I think that is going to be, all part of it.
Do you have any sense that CERN will be, quote, successful in opening? We're looking at Revelation 9, the angel was cast from heaven, given the key to the bottomless pit, and the pit was opened. Do you see CERN as being successful in that context of Revelation 9?
Well, they think they're going to be successful with it. That's for sure. And what we do know is a star comes down from heaven with the key to the abyss. So star typically means angel. And is that, an allegory of a fallen star? That's possibly. But I don't, I'm not sure what that actually means as to who opens the abyss.
Sure.
Because typically how prophecy sort of lays out is that it's what happens here on earth, and God allows it to play out because, he is greater than free choice, right? And he knows how things are all going to play out. But Revelation talks specifically about a star. It doesn't say a fallen angel. It doesn't say a rebellious angel. It says, an angel. So I'm kind of agnostic on that one as to actually who opens the abyss, because I'm not sure, because I could interpret that two ways. And if you get into the spurious belief, is that in some of the spurious and polytheist myths and legends is Azazel, who many think is the leader of the abyss, or maybe he's the one that's just going to open it up, is actually hung in Orion. But then the book of Enoch also says he's in the abyss. So you get these conflicting sort of sources there. But certainly this connection they have to Orion and Azazel being hung there is prevalent in their belief system.
Okay.
But I'm kind of thinking, no, they don't actually open it up themselves. They may say they did, but I don't think they will. I think, my personal opinion is I think God sends an angel down and lets them out because it's the end time.
Yeah, pretty literal. Real quick, in about 2 minutes, can you answer this for me? And I know this is actually kind of tripping you up, and I apologize up front. You're familiar with Jesus in the temple and the woman who was accused of adultery, and Jesus Christ is writing in the sand, and he's having two instances where he's writing in the sand and he's addressing the Pharisees, the accusers. Have you seen anything in your research to indicate that perhaps Jesus was inscribing geomantic figures in the sand in the language of the Pharisees so that they knew that he was aware of their dark practices? Does that sound familiar?
I've not researched that sort of aspect of it, but that does make a lot of sense, that he would show them something that would absolutely startle them and you would think shake them to their bones, but it didn't seem to as well. So, but there's no doubt whatever he wrote in there was designed specifically for them in a way that they would understand it, that they would know they're up against something that, was greater than they had anticipated. But I've not done enough research to really think about, whether or not that was geomancy that was being portrayed to them or not.
Sure.
But certainly, as being the Word of God, he would have all the knowledge of all of that. Right. So,
you know what, my friend, we are quantum entangled, and you have joined the ranks of Kev Baker and myself being quantum entangled. I'm going to have Kev take us out. I want to thank you so much for what you have brought to our audience today. We are definitely, if you will be gracious enough, we're going to have you back as soon as possible to continue this. I am going to read your book, folks. I recommend The Genesis 6 Conspiracy. You got a taste of it. I, as a researcher, love to read and dig down into the same rabbit holes that this astounding man of God has gone with this work, and I will read every page, and then I want to talk to you again. Kev, take us out of here. God bless you, Gary.
Thank you.
Absolutely amazing. And, I might have been quiet tonight, folks, but I was absolutely enthralled in that, listening to Tony and Gary going over all of these things and adding so many confirmations to the conversations that myself and Tony have had previously. Absolutely amazing. And I can't wait till we do this all again. And remember, folks, please check out Gary's website over at genesis6.com. That's Genesis6Conspiracy.com, sorry. Genesis 6 Conspiracy. You can get the book over at Amazon as well. That almost concludes another night of KBS, but don't go anywhere after the break, because Lucky and Dr. Brooks Agnew, they'll be coming along with Quantum Connections, and they'll be updating everyone on all of the latest from what happened in Vegas, as well as talking about this sonic weapon attack down in Cuba. Very, very strange one indeed. And I urge you all, I invite you all to join me tomorrow night when I'm going to be joined by spiritual warrior himself. Mr. Bill Bean will be back on the show. My mum will be getting excited already. She absolutely loves this guy. And, Bill is such a gentleman, just like Gary and Tony here, on and off there, just the genuine article. And that's why I think so many of you listeners out there love to listen to Bill when he comes along as well. And Tony, we've got a couple of minutes left. I mean, this isn't our last date of the week. We hook up again on Friday. Any plans for that one?
Yes, we'll be joined again by our good friend from Hollywood, David Heavener, who's putting together the new television network that he is responsible for. And he is hoping to bring a notable luminary from the world of Hollywood, Hollyweird, to our show on Friday. Now, we'll see who it is. I have no knowledge. He's on the road, but he is going to talk about his network and the Christian-based network production of the Last Evangelist television series. So we're going to get an update on that, and we hope to meet somebody famous.
And hopefully getting the inside scoop on Hollywood, which we've tried to cover many times on this show and others before. Maybe that will open people's eyes out there to just what is going on in that, Tony nailed it, Hollyweird. That is one strange, strange place. And, these stars that maybe David Heavener can bring along, they really will add to the conversation as well. And with their names, Tony, name recognition, I can only see the shows getting bigger from here on out.
They certainly will, and David is really helping us to expand our reach, Kev, into folks that are like-minded, that happen to be living and working in Hollywood, and give us that insider insight as to what's going on in their belief systems and what the agenda is, what they're pushing.
Well, folks, there's the music. I have had a blast tonight. I hope you have too. Stay tuned for Lucky and Doc Brooks Agnew after the break. Until next time, wherever you are, make it TFR.
And God bless you all.
Secret societies and fairies. What would you do if you learned refugees from another apocalypse dutifully encoded dire warnings into worldwide testimonies, preserving them for a specific generation? This generation concerning an ancient and ongoing conspiracy to enslave mankind. Would you simply walk away Seriously, would you really tell anyone? Or would you disregard the personal onslaughts that would be sure to follow the exposure of such controversial discoveries? Now that there, folks, that should get you ready for tonight's show with author Gary Wayne. And as Tony was gratefully sharing there, Gary is a Christian contrarian who has maintained a lifelong love affair with biblical prophecy, history, and mythology. And his extensive study has encompassed the Holy Bible and Gnostic scriptures, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, the Gilgamesh, and other ancient epics, language etymology, and secret publications. And that's why, Gary, I'm so excited to finally have you back tonight, sir. How are you doing?
I am doing just excellent and just so happy to be back working with you, Kev, and working with Anthony again, and very much looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have this evening.
Now, where can people find your website and this absolutely amazing book? And I'm not just saying that, folks. I've got this book sat in front of me. It's a massive book. I haven't read it from cover to cover. I've dived in from time to time because there's so many fascinating topics in there, Gary. So where can people get a hold of this?
Yeah, so you can pick it up on Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com. It's available on most online bookstores. It's also available through a local bookstore if you wanted to support them. It's distributed by Bookmasters if they don't have it on the shelf, so they can order it through Bookmasters, who distributes the book. You can also get signed copies on my website at the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis 6 with the number 6. And on the website, you can actually have a look at all 98 chapters and get a feel for what the book is about, because I provide a generous excerpt on each chapter.
Absolutely.
You can get a hold of me through my website, off the email there, or you can get a hold of me through Facebook under Gary Wayne or any of the Genesis 6 conspiracy pages that I have out there. And I also work with the Giantology page as well. And you can follow and predict certain events to happen at that day is kind of getting way ahead of ourselves. And I'm not so sure it lines up with the balance of prophecy that September 23rd was going to all of a sudden project us right into the end days. And I also want to make very, very clear, though, in case people aren't really understanding where I'm coming from, is I do believe the end days are on the horizon. I'm just not convinced that the timing of September 23rd with this particular sign was relevant to where we are in the lead into the end time. So that's just my take on it. But I would also suggest that this may be the first of many of these types of things that we're going to be dealing with, because there's going to be a lot of signs.
Absolutely. Tony, let's bring you in here, because I know September the 23rd, this was a date that we spoke about quite often in the build-up to it, wasn't it?
Yeah, and in fact, Friday the 22nd, we had a show in which we talked about the 23rd. We also talked about Cassini, the space probe that entered into Saturn's atmosphere. So we had a couple of things to talk about that were out there in the sort of the land of woo, as we like to say here on TFR. Something you taught me, Kev, the land of woo. I presented it as not the day of the rapture. Tried to say much the same thing that Gary has just said. But I'm taking my own personal stance on saying that there was perhaps, I'm not dogmatic, that this might have marked the beginning of the 7-year tribulation, and that we're seeing a escalation of events that are beginning to take place in the early days of the tribulation, with it, of course, becoming more profound. But I'm not putting words in Gary's mouth. That's not and I'm not going to be contentious with what he's saying. I'm simply saying that in my own perspective, I think we can agree that these are the latter days, and that we should be watching, as Gary said, for additional signs. And I think we can look within ourselves for additional signs and markers that we're being transformed and perhaps even augmented. So, Gary, there's more we can talk about on that, but I want to give you the floor. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, and I also think that 2017 is certainly one of those crossroads me or get a hold of me on Twitter at GaryWayne63, at GaryWayne63. And if you do get a hold of me with a question, I will get back to you.
Absolutely brilliant. Now, we were trying to decide where to start tonight. And of course, September the 23rd, a date that has been cast into all of our minds forever. It's in our rear view mirror now. But what really happened on September the 23rd? And this is where we're going to kick off tonight's discussion, because, Gary, so many people were losing their mind in the lead up to this 23rd of September prophecy event. What was your take on all of that, man?
Yeah, I was quite concerned at how it had turned into such a event, and I think maybe for maybe some of the wrong reasons. It's one of those things that I was thinking that, and I want to qualify for the people that, prophecy doesn't always tend to happen the way people think it's going to happen. And, certainly look at what happened to the people of Judea when the Messiah came. And they certainly didn't come in the form and the way that they would have expected it. So that's one of the things we have to learn about prophetic things. And what September 23rd was referring to was some astronomical alignment, but that would refer to Revelation 12 with the picture of the woman and the child and the dragon. But unfortunately, we have to be careful of the signs, and we also have to be careful of the order of how prophecy probably will come out. And again, I know there will be a lot of disagreements on that, but Revelation 12 happens during the time of the trumpets, and it's well into the Revelation sort of narrative if you were to read it as a sequence of events. Now, not everybody reads it that way, but so that was one of the first things that I was watching very closely at. And then, but really I was watching closely for is a sign that's interpreted through astrology is probably not the way to interpret it for a Christian. I know there's going to be signs and things in the end time, just as there's going to be, many false Christs and many false prophets who will also perform great signs and miracles to deceive the elect if that were possible. And I think that was a good warning. To watch it is one thing, but for years where things are happening with more significant impacts and shaking, of the world order, of events, that I think things start to heat up fairly quickly. Whether or not we're in the last 7 years, I think we're probably, I would diverge a little bit and say I think we're closing in on the start of the final 7 years. But I also would look for some other things that should come together, and keep in mind that this would need to come together and can come together rather quickly to be in the end time. And one of the things that we need to see happening more quickly and coming together more quickly is the rise of the universal religion, which I believe is kind of the first piece that comes in place that will permit the sacrifice on the temple in the first 3.5 years, and also is sort of that guiding sort of unity that actually permits the world government to come together. And I think all of that can happen quite quickly with catastrophic events, right? Whether or not you have economic disaster or you have a nuclear war with what's going on, whether it's limited or not with North Korea, whether or not you just have breakouts of war in all different parts, whether or not you have, an alien sort of coming out, as in the fourth kind, where they introduce themselves. You have all sorts of different catalysts that could move things extraordinarily quickly. But in the first 3.5 years of the last 7 is you have these forces in play, and then along comes Antichrist. So I think we need to see a few things first.
Can you help me to understand what's going on with the Pope at this point in terms of what I've called the re-reformation of the Protestant and Catholic Church, the 500-year Jubilee? Do you see anything on the horizon, the near horizon, in terms of Vatican activity and the forming of that one world religion under I consider the Pope the false prophet?
Yeah. So I think that I would have expected Pope Francis to move at a quicker pace than what he has been moving at, whether or not he's considered the false prophet or he's considered the anti-pope. And let me just explain anti-pope for the listeners. Anti-pope is the
This is the Kev Baker Show. Seeking answers to age-old questions, deciphering the world painted around you by the mainstream media. This is the Kev Baker Show. And now, here is your host, Kev Baker.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome back to another live broadcast of the Kev Baker Show right here on its home network of TFRlive.com. I am your host for the next 2 hours of what's going to be absolutely mind-blowing radio right here. My name's Kev Baker, and tonight, it's Wednesday night, I'm joined by my other co-host, Mr. I almost said Johnny Whistles there. Anthony Patch, you're with us. You almost became Whistles for the night, Tony.
Well, that's probably an improvement given my Nephilim hands that keep interrupting your train of thought.
It's because you've both got that similar hairstyle. It really is. And, you know, tonight's show, Tony, all joking aside, this is going to be a really amazing couple hours of radio because tonight's guest is a returning guest, and it's thanks to you that we've put this show together tonight, because with everything that's happened to me over the past year, obviously, I've lost contact with people. Things have been moving too fast, and I'm really, really grateful to you for putting together tonight's show.
Well, no, it's my pleasure. And Gary Wayne's a good friend. He and I have had an opportunity to speak before on a different platform. But Gary is a hardcore researcher. He has a 700-plus book of pure research, biblically based, that we're going to talk about tonight. I'm going to let Gary step in here in about 5 seconds and give his curriculum vitae and the title of his book. And
even
go ahead.
Gary does that, I just want to give the audience a taste of this man's writing, because just the opening paragraph of his book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, if this doesn't get you excited about tonight's show, I don't know what will, because it says here, what would you do if you discovered the end times and the Antichrist were somehow interconnected with giants, modern conspiracy theories, aliens, vampires,